Hello. So, welcome to the last chapter of The Great Gatsby. We just pretty much finished the novel. Hopefully, you guys have all finished reading it on your own and you're going over it now just to kind of polish it and get it all ready for a presentation. Let me just go over the questions with you real quick. Why doesn't Wolfsheim go to the funeral? He says, I don't get involved with things like that. Which is not very nice, but that's what he says. It gives you an insight into the type of friends that Gatsby has. Basically, he has very few people who attend the funeral. The only guests are Nick, Gatsby's father, Owl Eyes from earlier in the novel, chapter 3. That was the character that was based on Ring Lodner, the writer, used to be a sports writer for a local newspaper in New York, also published a few short stories. He shows up there, and that's about it. Three or four butlers come in, they're soaking wet. So we have the water imagery throughout the chapter. The drizzle is always soaking everybody. The rain's coming down hard, so hard that the butlers and the service people are dripping wet. And remember, of course, Gatsby died in a pool of water after being shot. So Gatsby's father is Henry Gantz, and he is very proud of his son. He's very happy that his son achieved so much. He goes on to relate him to James J. Hill, who was the famous railroad tycoon from Minnesota. And remember, Gantz is from Minnesota. That is the heart of the Midwest, part of the heart of the Midwest. And remember, like we've been saying, this novel is about Midwestern values. Nick is critical of everybody on the East. He says at one point that this is a novel of the West. In other words, he, Gatsby, Jordan, even Daisy, Tom, they all came from the West, Chicago and outward. I mean, Daisy originally started off in the South, but she moved up to the Chicago area with Tom. And Nick seems to be saying that because he seems to be saying that those values, the traditional American values, that you go to church every week, you believe in God, you work hard, and you prosper. These seem to be the values that Nick is promoting in the story. But James J. Hill is important because he's the classic American riches story. He became a railroad tycoon and he used all the underhanded tactics that Rockefeller used and those sorts of people. And he became fabulously wealthy. He's a famous robber baron in American history, which is something that you should all be familiar with. Klipsberger, you notice when he contacts Nick, all he wants from Nick are a pair of sneakers, tennis shoes. He says, I'm quite lost without them. Could you have a butler send them over? Nick hangs up in disgust, and I guess we're supposed to be disgusted as well that Gatsby never figured out that when you have that much money and you have a party every single weekend, you're going to get a bunch of people who just hang around. Um, I guess we're supposed to be morally outraged by that, and to some extent, I'm sure we all are. But that's all Klipsberger wants from Nick. And then we have the people who attend the funeral. I went over the whole thing about the West after all. And Nick's final goodbye to Jordan when he meets her. Notice how neither one of them ever discuss what's really going on. Nick never says, I think I loved you for a while. Nick never says that he has a hard time walking away from her. He doesn't talk about it, as so many people do in that sort of situation. You talk about anything but what you really mean. But Jordan says to him, nevertheless, you did throw me over. In other words, from her point of view, she's convinced that Nick just kind of dumped her. And so that's the justification for her not talking to Nick. She tells him she is now engaged to somebody else, but this doesn't really faze Nick since he's supposed to be engaged to somebody else out west. But he doesn't bring up any of that. So you'll notice on page 177, he talks about it. She was dressed to play golf, and I remember thinking she looked like a good illustration. Her chin raised a little jauntily, her hair the color of an autumn leaf, her face the same brown tint as the fingerless glove on her knee. When I finished, she told me without comment that she was engaged to another man. I doubted that, though there were several she could have married at the nod of her head, but I pretended to be surprised. For just a minute, I wondered if I wasn't making a mistake. Then I thought it all over again quickly and got up to say goodbye. Nevertheless, you did throw me over, said Jordan suddenly. You threw me over on the telephone. I don't give a damn about you now, but it was a new experience for me, and I felt a little dizzy for a while. We shook hands. Oh, and do you remember a conversation we had once about driving a car? Why, not exactly, says Nick. She goes on, you said I was a bad driver and was only safe until I met another bad driver. Well, I met another bad driver, didn't I? I mean, it was careless of me to make such a wrong guess. I thought you were rather an honest, straightforward person. I thought it was your secret pride. I'm 30, I said. I'm 5 years too old to lie to myself and call it honor. She didn't answer, angry and half in love with her, and tremendously sorry. I turned away. So there's a couple of interesting things, I think, in that exchange. One is that the only person who attempts to be honest about their feelings is Jordan, and she's supposed to be the cheater. The one, remember, she moved her golf ball from a bad lie. I don't know if we went over that in class, but when you're playing golf, you hit the ball and it goes, say, a couple hundred yards down the course. Wherever it lands, you have to hit it again. And the number of times that you hit it to get it into the hole, the little cup at the end, those are called the strokes. Now, what Nick is saying, she moved the ball from a bad lie. In other words, she had hit the ball and it ended up laying somewhere next to, say, a rock or something that would make it difficult to shoot it up closer to the green. So she's a cheater, according to Nick. And yet, in this moment here, the so called honest, straightforward person, as Jordan accurately describes him and his view of himself, she's the only one that can really be kind of honest about her feelings. Nick never says this. He never talks about how he's kind of angry, how he's half in love with her, and how terribly sorry he is about all of this. He keeps it to himself. He walks on. And one of the things about Fitzgerald as a writer is that is so common. Everybody has had an experience like that at one point in their life. Everybody has been on one side or the other of that exchange. Either we've been Jordan and we've tried to talk about our feelings with somebody who is denying everything that's going on, or we've been Nick. And this is one of the things about Fitzgerald. This is the novel, more than any other novel in America, that everybody knows. Every student who goes to college, this is the one thing that everybody has in common. And one of the reasons, I think, is not just because English teachers like to teach it, but it's also because it says things that we can all relate to. And it captures something that's so right about understanding the America that we all live in. This is who we have in our country. And the very next scene that we get is Tom and Daisy saying goodbye. And Nick's estimation of the rich, the very rich, they were careless people. Tom and Daisy. They smashed things up and creatures, and then retreated back into their money or their vast carelessness, or whatever it was that kept them together, and let other people clean up the mess they had made. It's on page 179. And they walk off. Se acabó. That's the end of them. And that is Nick's estimation of the very wealthy, which is, it's like anything else about people. Sometimes it's true, sometimes not. You can't classify any group of people as behaving in any specific way. Sometimes they behave badly, sometimes they behave very well. It depends on the situation, the people, all sorts of things. But when he ends, when this great novel finally ends, he says, and so we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. He says Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch our arms farther, and one fine morning, and so we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. Eugene O'Neill once said that there is no present, there is no future, there is only the past happening over and over and over again. So Fitzgerald is saying something about how we can never escape who we are. he's also saying something about, the whole American dream, that green light, that orgastic future that we all kind of reach for one way or another. And that's something to really think about. The other thing I wanted to say, just as like a parting thought, with Fitzgerald and the way he writes, and just the beauty of the way he uses the language. If you guys go back to page 110, that's when Gatsby tells Nick, well, Nick says, you can't repeat the past. And Gatsby says, can't repeat the past? Why, of course you can. And as we know, this is very much a novel about the past, about a guy who's trying to bring the beautiful past back to life. But at the bottom of that page, he talks to us about how it all came about between Gatsby and Daisy. He says, one autumn night, 5 years before, they had been walking down the street when the leaves were falling. And they came to a place where there were no trees and the sidewalk was white with moonlight. They stopped here and turned toward each other. Now it was a cool night with that mysterious excitement in it which comes at the two changes of the year. The quiet night in the houses were humming out into the darkness, and there was a stir and bustle among the stars. Out of the corner of his eye, Gatsby saw that the blocks of the sidewalks really formed a ladder and mounted to a secret place above the trees. He could climb to it if he climbed alone. And once there, he could suck on the pap of life, gulp down the incomparable milk of wonder. His heart beat faster and faster as Daisy's white face came up to his own. He knew that when he kissed this girl and forever wed his his unutterable visions to her perishable breath, his mind would never romp again like the mind of God. So he waited, listening for a moment longer to the tuning fork that had been struck upon a star. Then he kissed her. At his lips' touch, she blossomed for him like a flower, and the incarnation was complete. And so there's an awful lot there. There's an awful lot of religious symbolism, the ladder, the stairway to heaven, Jacob's ladder in the Bible, the vision of Ezekiel. That particular passage is pointing to, I don't know if we actually did the poem, Hallelujah, from that famous Leonard Cohen song that gets done so many times. And Hallelujah is about the basic problem of being a person of faith. How can you have faith in a secular world where absolute right and absolute wrong doesn't exist? Everything's kind of a gray area. And for that poet, Leonard Cohen, he's saying, how can I maintain my faith in the face of my desire? So he desires these relationships with women, and that pulls him away from his faith. But he doesn't learn anything through these relationships. He has these relationships with these women, and the only thing that he learns is how to shoot someone who outdrew you. In other words, how to hurt somebody else's feelings before they hurt you. Sort of like the way Jordan and Nick talk at the end of the novel. just kind of hit them quick and get out. So for the poet in that, the only thing that he can do is to return to his prayer. So hallelujah, hallelujah is repeated again and again and again. And Fitzgerald is saying something there too about Gatsby. Gatsby was at a point in his life where he could do anything that he wanted. And what he wanted more than anything else was to love Daisy. Now, we can pass judgment on him as Nick does, but even Nick can't completely condemn Gatsby for that. And I don't think most of us can. We can be critical of his criminality. We can certainly be critical of the people that he associated with. Meyer Wolfsheim is not a good person, and he is not based on a good person. But ultimately, somebody who's willing to give up the ability to accomplish anything in life for love, that's something most of us can more or less forgive. And so I leave you now, and Fitzgerald leaves you. Thanks.